cell number. Do you want to text her real quick?
Yeah.
Thank you. So while we're waiting for Kathy, Dawn, do you want to call the roll real quick?
Helps if I unmute. Ron Van Kirk.
Absent excuse?
Thank you. Meg Ryan Shockey.
Here.
Andy Stelhertz.
Here.
Kathy Pucci.
She's on, but we're checking if she can hear us.
Okay. Aaron Borowski.
Here.
Kevin Tansky.
Here.
Sue Grodick.
Here.
Thank you.
So we're going to wait to, well, Sue, can you let us know if Kathy gets back to you? Thank you. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy to get us started.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks for taking the time to join us here tonight virtually. We wanted to have a bit of a discussion and follow up to the open house that we recently had to talk about where we are in the process, what we heard coming out of that meeting from the advisory committee, and those of you who were in attendance at the open house, and then in follow up from just emails and phone calls, kind of dive into the zoning map with some discussion topics, and then touch on the uses with the idea that we really just want to get some feedback and make sure we're heading in the right direction so we can kind of wrap this section up. It's an iterative process, so we won't be done with it. We will be able to come back and make changes as we discuss other things and maybe decide we want to change the category of a use or something like that. So once it's kind of put on the shelf, it's not there forever. It's something we can take back down and look at again. So we do have Liz Fields here from McBride Dale Clarion. Some of you are familiar with Liz and have seen her in the past. She's going to walk us through PowerPoint and kind of lead the discussion from here on out. And so, Dawn, I don't know what you have to do to let Liz. Looks like you've already done it. So, thank you. Liz, I'll pass it off to you.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy. Hello, all again. Most of you are becoming very familiar faces to me. So yeah, as Jeremy said, we wanted to just kind of follow up on a few things. And for those that weren't at the open house or the advisory committee meeting, kind of fill you all in on where we're at in the process. So just as an update, this is where we're at. So we went through the initiation process, we went through the code diagnosis process, and now we're drafting the regulation. So if you've seen previous slides that look like this, we are proposing a slight change in how we're going to go about finishing the rest of the code drafting. We originally had kind of 4 modules set up. After some discussions with Jeremy, we think it would be better and more productive to kind of draft smaller amounts at a time. And so then when you're all reviewing it and we're reviewing it with the public, it's, maybe 20 pages instead of 40 pages. And when we're talking about zoning, that makes a huge difference in like how fast you can get through it and your attention span. And so that's kind of our thought process moving forward, is that we'll maybe have more meetings with the advisory committee, but over kind of a smaller section of work. So right now we're finishing up the zoning districts and use regulations. We are starting to draft the dimensional and design standards. So that's in progress now and should be finished sometime next month. And then we'll go on to parking and landscaping, then signage and lighting, then administration procedures, and we'll finish up with definitions. This change does not affect our overall timeline. We'll still be done around when we thought we would be done. And we're in good shape for getting on the March primaries for the referendum.
Correct.
So as Jeremy stated, we had the advisory committee and the open house a couple weeks ago on January 18th. We had good turnout for the advisory committee members. Most of the members were present. And then the open house we held afterwards. We didn't have great turnout. Most of the turnout was from city council members, planning commission members, a board of zoning appeals member. We only had a few members of the public that don't currently serve on a Brooklyn Border Commission. But to kind of complement that event, I did record the presentation of the PowerPoint presentation I gave to the advisory committee, and that was placed on our project website. And then I believe also linked to the city's website. I think it was also placed on the city's YouTube page. So that's still up and available. If anybody wants to like kind of the full overview of that presentation, that's available for you. And then we also put all the materials that we discussed online for people to access if they wanted to review them. And then we directed all comments to Jeremy. So a lot of the comments that we heard that we're going to talk about tonight were things that people directly emailed to Jeremy. So this is kind of a summary of the main things that we heard from that engagement. So we heard concerns about public facilities being built in the city's parks. For those that have seen this presentation before, we are proposing a new public facilities and open space zone, but people did provide Jeremy some feedback of concerns of, like a museum or a government building being built in the park. So that's something that we're going to discuss tonight about how we want to move forward. We heard and discussed a lot, especially with the advisory committee, about the commercial properties that are south of I-480. The hotel, the Chipotle, the Starbucks, the gas station, all those commercial uses are zoned limited industrial. And does it really make sense to either leave those commercial parcels zoned limited industrial, or either change their zoning? So if they have commercial zoning, which would be more appropriate, or change kind of the uses permitted in the limited industrial zoning to kind of clean up some of that inconsistencies with what we have out there. We also have some discussion areas that we've hatched on the proposed zoning map. Those were discussed, and we want to discuss those more with you tonight. There were some issues or questions or kind of cleanup items that were identified on the proposed permitted use chart. So some of these were just things that maybe we overlooked, like having car washes be conditional in the retail business district. We know that's a hot topic right now. And like offices were not permitted in our limited industrial zone. That was an oversight. We're going to correct those things. So as we find those kind of either oversights or inconsistencies, we're going to correct them as we go. Again, this is not, we don't draft this and then not look at it until the end. We can continue to kind of update and refine and perfect these zoning standards and use standards as we go through drafting the other sections. And then we had some questions and concerns regarding the current moratorium uses that we also want to talk about tonight. So we're going to first start talking about the zoning map. So just as a refresher, this is your current zoning map. It is originated many years ago, very hard to interpret. So we are going towards, this is your proposed zoning map. It's going to be a lot easier for the public and staff to review what parcels are zoned what and where the different boundaries are and how this is all laid out. This is a draft. The parcels of what they're shown today will probably change somewhat in some ways between now and the end, but we have to start somewhere. So on this map, the light yellows and the oranges are, and into the browns are all your residential zones. The pinks and the reds are your business zones. The purples are your industrial zones. And then the green is the proposed public facilities and open space zone. And then again, there are those discussion areas in a few places that we've identified. This is the current parcels of what we're proposing to change the zoning of kind of what they're zoned today versus what we're proposing them to be. These are the parcels that would change their zoning. Most of these changes are, again, those parcels that are going from primarily residential zoning to that public facilities and open space zoning. And then there are some parcels along Memphis as you go outside, towards past Tiedemann, outside the city, where the front portion of the lots used to be zoned, or currently are zoned retail, where the back portions are zoned industrial. This would clean that up, make kind of the whole parcel zoned industrial. It's a lot easier from an administration standpoint if you have a single zoning on a property. So there's going to be some kind of cleanup situations with the zoning map as we as we go through. So one of our first discussion topics that we want to go over with you all tonight is this public facilities and open space zone. So we originally went through and highlighted all the current open space, preservation areas, parks, public facilities, the city facilities, the rec center, fire stations, and also large scale churches, and identified those to be in this proposed public and facility zones. The comments that we've received is that, again, that there's concerns about a church or a museum or a library or something getting built in the middle of the parks. Again, that, for those of us who understand zoning, that's very unrealistic and unlikely to happen. But we also want to make sure that the public is comfortable with what we're proposing. So Jeremy and I, we've talked this through, and, from a staff perspective and a consultant standpoint, we don't see any issues with splitting this proposed public facilities and open space zone into two separate zoning districts, one just for public facilities. And so that would be your city buildings and your churches and your schools and your libraries. And then one just for public parks and open space. So that zone would be for your parks, your playgrounds, your preservation areas, only for those areas. And then we could make sure that the public understands that the parks are parks, they're going to stay parks, and that there's this other land that's designated for the actual public facilities. So
May I ask you a question?
Yeah.
This is Kathy. Hi. Why would a church be part of our public facilities and park open space?
Generally, religious institutions, especially large scale religious institutions, are considered kind of an institutional use and in that category of land uses. So it makes sense to me as a planner and consultant to include them in this category because they're a nonprofit use, similar to if you had a community facility or things like that. If it doesn't make sense to you all, it's not a requirement by any means. Those parcels could stay residentially zoned.
And which ones in our community are we identifying as such?
I need some help from Jeremy on that. I know that there is the large church that's next to your city building. Were there any others?
St. Elias?
Yes, the two, St. Elias, and then the building next that they also own, that was a church.
The former Good Shepherd
Correct.
Church?
St. Thomas More, and then
Cleveland Baptist.
some of the other ones.
Martin, we also have one on Ridge Road,
Martin Luther?
Martin Luther. And then up there at the very top of the Trinity Church near the highway at 71.
Is that this?
Yep.
And it may be smart just because I know that there's been some concerns, some of these religious institutions sit on fairly large pieces of land that if the public is concerned about those flipping to residential development or another type of development, this could help kind of calm some of those nerves.
Mhm.
But, it's not a requirement that they be in this category.
I've got
Okay.
a question. What about put them in like a little subcategory as nonprofits? Because also up by Memphis and Tiedemann, you've got Knights of Columbus facility. Should that fall into this too?
Is that in the proposed, is that in the
It's
retail?
in, it's in the retail. I mean, that's more of a social organization.
Right.
Where, you know, churches, museums, libraries, civic buildings typically fall into the public facilities. And I think the public facilities zoning, the permitted uses is more restrictive. So, you know, where that building is, and it's on such a commercial intersection,
Mhm.
you might want that to develop as a commercial use down the road, long term. So even though it does have that nonprofit type of use now, long term it probably makes sense to be zoned commercially. Where if you look at St. Elias, or you know, it's right next to the park. So does that probably make sense to be part of public facilities, because it's a little bit more restrictive in the uses that, you know, could go there when if it were ever to redevelop. Where if it stays in single family housing, they would by right be able to develop that as housing as outlined in the zoning. So that's kind of the rationale. And in some of the comments that we received, or that I received from some residents, was just the concern, as Liz outlined, that, you know, technically, you know, Memorial Park, and some of the other parks, you know, you would, the way it's written now, when it's combined into one district, you would be able to put as a permitted use a museum or a library or a civic building within the park, even though I think the intent of creating this is to protect the parks and green space. But in talking with Liz, you know, it's not hard to break those two apart at this point, and create, you know, a public facility only zoning district, and a parks and open space only district. And, you know, the permitted uses in a park zoning would be parks, playgrounds, and accessory buildings to that use, you know, pavilions, bathrooms, those type of things. So I think it removes any fear that some folks have. And it's an easy step to make at this point, and it still speaks to the same intent, I think, of what we were trying to accomplish with that district.
Okay, thank you.
May I be recognized? May I be recognized? It's
Sure.
Kathy. So I do think my suggestion would be to go with splitting them, where we do have the green space in one category. And I can see the advantage to including those large tracts of land in the public facilities, just for the reasons you stated, especially the ones that are close to our park. So that there would be less of a chance if one of them ever sold, there would be less of a chance that we would have something that would be not optimum for us, especially being so close to our park. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other comments that any of the council members have on this before we move on? Or is there, you know, consensus with splitting them up is the right path forward?
I think it makes sense.
Split them.
All right, I'm going to take that as a yes. And again, we can continue to discuss this and refine this as we go. So, you know, if we get down the road and you all decide, well, maybe that doesn't make sense, we can combine them back together. It's not final until it's final, and then it can always be changed as well. A zoning code is a living document and is supposed to be able to be updated and amended as appropriate. So it's, you know, it's easy to kind of get in that mindset of this is our last chance, we have to get it right, but it is really something that can be updated as needed. So as I, kind of teed up earlier, this area south of I-480 down here, we'll zoom into that. These parcels, so we have the Key Bank, is that the right bank? Okay,
Yes,
so
it's
the Key Bank office building is back here. You have the hotels, you have restaurants. On this side, you have more hotels and restaurants and a gas station. Those are all commercial land uses and are permitted land uses in your retail districts, but they're all zoned limited industrial. I'm not sure how all this happened and how all this occurred over time, but it's the situation that you have today. And since we're updating the code and we're updating the map, this is a good time to kind of fix some of these weird situations that you have today. So it seems to me, looking at this, that kind of your two main options are rezone these properties that are developed as commercial to general business, which is what Brook Park zoning, or the majority of Brook Park is zoned, this dark red, or add these commercial uses to be permitted uses in the limited industrial. So either of those options would take these uses into conforming status with their zoning, their current use and their zoning, where today I would consider that these, don't have conformance with the uses as it developed and its current zoning. I know that there were some loopholes in the code that got you where you are today, but it makes sense now to clean it up, at least from our standpoint.
Well, what happened with, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just going to add, it's good to consider not only the makeup of that portion south of 480 that Liz has talked about, and when you consider rezoning it or adding additional uses to the LI, because the LI, as you can see on the map, goes north of I-480, is on the west side of the road. Then you have the Plain Dealer, and then you have that parcel on the northeast corner that's recently transferred. So if we, at this point, if we add to the LI, we're adding uses to that northern part as well. Where if we think about rezoning the southern piece, which is more commercial in nature, and I would consider even consider rezoning Brook Park Road west of Tiedemann as well, because you do have some of those commercial uses going down Tiedemann as well. Then you're like Liz is saying, you're bringing into conformance those uses that really belong in the general business district. You're also recognizing the nature of where Brook Park is heading, in which is more of a business commercial district versus an industrial district. But then it also resets sort of the precedent that's been set on the southern part going north. So, after this would be adopted, going north of 480, the LI would truly be the LI again. So it would be those uses that are identified as permitted or conditional. So you wouldn't have to necessarily worry that you're going to have commercial, sort of highway commercial going north on Tiedemann, where, it doesn't necessarily seem to be the desire, at least what I've heard, to have that kind of development pattern and uses going north on Tiedemann beyond 480.
And I was just going to add that when Key Bank came in, they had a proposal for the campus that they have now. Not everything came to fruition at one time. They had hoped to have like a higher end hotel when they first proposed it, but the real issue really came into play with the Forest City property, which is the Cascades, and they were having a very, very difficult time. They promised the city an office building, came to the city, and said, we're having a hard time, but we think if we have some of the accessory uses in place that might, which are the restaurants, that might entice, people who'd be willing to come into like a small office space that they had promised the city that they would build. So that's how those non-conforming uses ended up there little by little.
I have a question for Jeremy or Liz. Is there any downside to adding the uses to the light industrial as it affects other light industrial around the city?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you add permitted uses or conditional uses to the LI, then all of that light purple of Tiedemann, that all those uses are then permitted there as well. So again, you would have to weigh, do you want to see that kind of commercial development start going north above 480 where it's really been south of 480 to this point? Because it's the same zoning. You can't allow it south and not allow it north. So yeah, that would be in my mind a bit of a downside of expanding the uses in LI, is that you would have sort of those highway commercial with the ability to go north on Tiedemann. And I don't know that the road capacity could handle that. I don't think you're getting closer to the residential community at that point. So you have that conflict of uses potentially, depending on what they are.
I would say, Sue, if you ever wanted to see the Plain Dealer, if it ever closes, be redeveloped as another Ridge Park Square, I mean, that would be going that way versus, rezoning the property to the south.
I kind of was thinking that, so I think I would lean more towards to rezone the areas that are commercial to commercial rather than add to the uses of limited industrial or light industrial.
I agree with Sue. I think it makes more sense to change the zoning than to add the permitted uses into the LI.
I would say with one exception, we have a nice office building with Key Bank, and I'm curious of, I would like long-term to hope that always remains an office building and I guess not open that up to develop into more like fast food or restaurants when there's enough already in that vicinity.
Can we just do it at the Cascades? I think that makes the most sense.
Yeah, that is definitely an option where if you left Key Bank, the office building as limited industrial, office is a permitted, will be a permitted use in the office zone. But it could be, it still would open it up to the other limited industrial zones, but then you wouldn't open it up to the commercial zones. If those are less appealing, having that go into a big box store or, chopped up into other commercial uses versus if it transferred into a manufacturing facility or a warehouse or a distribution center, it's just kind of which future scenario is the most appealing or the most appropriate in your guys' minds.
Can we add office building as a conditional use to commercial?
Office will be allowed in office is allowed in commercial.
Yeah, office is allowed in general business. So even if you did rezone all of the purple south of 480, office would be a permitted use. So they wouldn't be a non-conforming use going forward.
Yeah, there's just no really way to always ensure that property stays office unless you put some sort of deed restriction on it or some sort of crazy something other than zoning. Really, if you put a zoning on a property, it just allows all that what that property permits. But
I share the mayor's concern though about the Key Bank property, because I think if we change it over to commercial, there's going to be a lot of other options that I mean, hopefully Key Bank is never going to leave, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And they would have more options available for that land that are definitely less desirable for us as a city.
So in that scenario, this property could stay LI, and then, you know, in here and in here, we would transfer those to GB. But this could retain, and then isn't this a utility substation?
Yes. it
So
is.
that could stay industrial, or it doesn't, I mean, really, that is what it is. So it doesn't really matter the zoning. But that's definitely a possibility. You probably also want to think about these parcels that Jeremy mentioned on Brook Park. If in the future you envision those parcels going to more commercial uses versus staying industrial uses. I think that's also a valid thing to consider, kind of your ideal land use for those moving forward. And I believe that the master plan calls all of Brook Park out as you know, commercial, mixed use, that kind of use, not industrial, but I'd have to double check that.
Yeah, the general, if it was rezoned west of Tiedemann to general businesses, certainly opens up the options for redevelopment of those parcels, because there's a lot more permitted uses than the limited industrial. So from that perspective, I think it makes some sense. And I think it lends itself to what that corridor has seemed to develop over the years. So it's just something else to consider.
Jeremy, I forget, I know that Brook Park corridor, they made some zoning recommendations. Was it the type of zoning?
You know, I have to go back and double check. I have it sitting right here so I can look as we discuss.
Okay.
I think it spoke to more of allowing more flexibility. So especially for a mix of uses.
I know it's not the final report, but I know it mentioned something in that review.
Yeah, it talked more about more development treatments and development standards and uses.
Okay.
And Mayor, were you referencing the county document that just came out as a draft, or the master plan?
The county, the Brook Park corridor plan that just came out.
Okay. Yeah, we reviewed that as well, and it was more kind of streetscaping
Okay.
and that kind of thing, rather than uses. I agree. But again, we're going to look at that in more detail and see how we can make the code align with those recommendations as much as we can.
Well, I think that gives us some direction where we can make some changes to the map, and next time we meet with council, we'll talk through those changes and see if we're heading in the right direction.
All right. So the next zoning discussion item we wanted to bring up was these discussion areas. On the proposed zoning map that we presented at the open house and what's online, we identified these, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas as areas where the existing zoning may or may not be appropriate, but it's worth, you know, having a discussion and kind of going through this process to either confirm and keep their existing zoning as they are, or maybe change it to align more with future visions and kind of ideas. So we have the residential on Manoa off of Tiedemann. That is a residential street surrounded by industrial and office. If we want to, what's kind of the future there? The multifamily zoned parcels along Memphis, this back multi-family zone parcel on the north end of town. And then you're gonna have to remind me what this little one
Those are
is.
some city-owned parcels that are right on Memphis near the city campus buildings. So we're bringing it up because I think it makes sense to look at it, a zoning other than single family there. That would allow for, maybe townhomes or something with a little bit more density and a little bit more of an urban feel, just because of the nature of those parcels.
Yes, thank you for the reminder.
Mhm.
And then the last one was these residential parcels on Ridge that are surrounded by also commercial, and then also the school property and the park. If in the long run, if it makes sense for those to stay residentially zoned or to allow for commercial zoning or something else. So those are the kind of 5 areas that, again, we just want to talk about more and get, all of your thoughts on what makes sense in these areas and if they warrant any changes.
I would just add to the parcels that are currently on Ridge and then on Manoa that are zoned residential and have single family houses. If the zoning were to be changed to a commercial zoning, they would just be legally non-conforming uses. So those houses would stay houses until there was a choice to put a commercial use on those parcels. So they could be bought and sold, and there's other on Ridge, north of that area. There's on the east side, there's some houses that are zoned retail now, that have recently sold and are still used as single family houses. So just to throw that background out there before we start to discuss.
I think, especially with the area on Manoa, I just think we should be taking the long view really on this whole thing, because this is not an exercise that you go through very frequently. And I really see the similarities with these situations as compared to the situation with the houses on Tiedemann that are across from the Plain Dealer. Because in the last rezoning, even though they are houses, they are in the LI district. And of course, they were grandfathered in as non-conforming uses. And the city, even though we could have, we did not object to when, they were bought, sold, additions put on to, substantial improvements to at least one of them. And I just think we should be taking the long view. And especially like when you look at Manoa, I mean, they're really isolated over there as far as being a residential area because of them being surrounded by the industrial and the commercial properties that abut it. The ones on Ridge, are these the ones, I'm just looking, so they're north of Bidoff?
Yeah, they're north of Copperstone.
Oh, right.
Heading up towards the library.
Right, I see
There's
that now.
yeah.
Okay,
And then there's like 2 or 3 on the east side of the street, I think,
okay.
as well.
I don't have strong feelings about those, like one way or the other. I just think, like, especially just looking at this on a map, that the Manoa is definitely the one that sticks out to me. And just to put my 2 cents in about the city-owned properties on Memphis, I would agree that I think we're going to have better luck, and it's going to fit in better if that does go to like a townhome or something that's more dense than a single-family home for those parcels. And that was kind of the idea when we started purchasing them.
And Jeremy, talk a little bit again about the property behind the Westbrooks now that is there.
Yeah, it's people refer to it as the Rabbit Run property. So it's been in and out of tax foreclosure in the time I've been here. So it's currently zoned the same zoning as the Westbrook apartments. So you could develop it at a similar density or a lesser density, under the proposal. So the idea of bringing that piece up is, you have single family houses to the north and to the west there. I've heard, mixed opinions on how much of that property you can develop because of wetlands and things like that. But, we wanted to get some direction on, does it make sense to necessarily keep it at, apartment house zoning, or would maybe a lesser zoning there that would kind of be a transition from the single family to the high-rise apartments on the other side of the street? It is there a desire to keep it green space? I mean, we just want to hear some feedback on what what makes sense with that piece of property long term.
Well, the feedback I heard during the master planning was loud and clear, do not put any more apartment buildings. So I think people would like it if we brought that zoning down and assured people that isn't what we were going to put, or we would no longer permit it back there. I think people would like that.
Hey, Jeremy, I'd agree with Sue, because over at the end of Springcrest and back in the ends of those cul-de-sacs, you've got some nice larger homes. That's the one thing we've always been kind of looking for. So maybe you could kind of like do a little loops in there and be able to build maybe a dozen homes or something in there. Because I really wouldn't want to be one of the residents that all of a sudden you've got a 6-story building next to you either. So I'm agreeing with Sue.
I agree also. I actually have heard from 2 residents of Springcrest who are very concerned about what's going to happen there. I know, Jeremy, you said that there's some question because of wetlands, but do we have any sense of, like, if it went to single family, like how many houses could go in there?
No, I really don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'll tell you the one guy, Dave Cerny, he was on our last public meeting, and he came to our last public meeting. He's interested in buying that property from the current owner out of foreclosure. It's back on its taxes, but not as an apartment building, but higher density use than it is back there for the houses. I'm not quite sure right now in the market, and maybe in the future, I'm not quite sure in the market that you'll find somebody willing to come in and develop that like the houses on Springcrest. They're going to look for a density because that's how they make their money. So, I mean, and the reason I've asked them to single out this property is because it's been a topic of conversation so much, and now is the time to figure out what we want this to look like.
And that's the thing that's kind of hard, because I understand residents' concerns, but when it's the zoning, like that's what it is. So I don't know that we should zone it single family, but definitely I think people would be relieved to know if a high-rise apartment could not go back there.
Yeah, and from the developer that the mayor talked about and a couple others who've come in and kind of kicked the tires on that property a little bit, I think they see it more of a townhome type product, so a little bit denser than the single family that you see to the north, but certainly not nearly as dense as the Westbrooks. So, again, it seems to make sense as a kind of a transition piece. And I think that everybody is sensitive to the folks who live around there and would be, incumbent upon the city and with development regulations to make sure that as many of those trees along the property lines remain. So, it's screened and provided some buffer for those folks. So I think that makes sense.
Wouldn't that kind of, isn't on the other side of the Westbrooks there, kind of I don't know if they're called townhomes, but they're essentially townhomes. I think they're, I don't know if they're condos or whatnot, but right on the other side of the Westbrooks there that go, essentially like lead into where that property is. You kind of have that setup kind of transitioning you into that as well, and then into the single family.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you do have on the east side of the street, their townhomes.
And they're older townhomes, as far as townhomes go. So I would think anything that would be built would look more modern and not necessarily like those. I would hope.
I would agree. And for the Up to Bat property, do you see again something similar to that on that property as well? Not a higher rise apartment, but perhaps some kind of townhomes or something of a little bit higher density than single family.
I wouldn't want to see an apartment there. I think a townhome, that would be fine with me. I think it makes sense because it's not that large of a parcel.
Mhm.
I agree. I wouldn't be in favor of an apartment.
Townhomes over there at Up to Bat, yeah, I'd still really like to kind of go towards the single families back behind the Westbrooks by the Springcrest, though.
How much wetland, Jeremy, how much wetland is back there impeding all that?
Andy had suggested it was, a fair amount, and I don't know that I ever saw a map. I don't know that it was ever delineated. But the developers had made it seem like it wasn't that big of an impediment. So until you get it delineated through the Army Corps and you know exactly what's out there, you don't know. And I haven't seen that.
Are we talking about Up to Bat or back by Rabbit Run?
The Rabbit Run, I believe.
No,
Okay.
I was talking about Up to Bat.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, up to Bat there's no wetlands there. I'm sorry. I thought we were talking about Rabbit Run again. No, there's no.
We do have a report for the Up to Bat property.
Yeah.
And, it used to be a big ravine, so we don't know how challenging it would even be to build onto that property. Period. It would definitely, by the maps that we've seen, have to be close to the road.
Yeah, it's a lot of construction, Phil. In talking with, the engineers from GPD that did some of the due diligence work, they felt to build anything, if you wanted to build up, you're going to have to put caissons down pretty far to where you hit something solid if you hit it at all. So, that's probably not conducive to that type of development, but maybe more of a, of a townhome or a slab type of development, because of the construction debris. But that would be, I think, for a developer in their due diligence to really look at what we've come up with through some of our soil work and determine what would be the best fit there. But wetlands are not going to be a problem. We did do that as part of our due diligence before we purchased it.
So what's the acreage in that whole area that could be built on if there's no wetlands now?
I believe when you add in the Speedway property and combined it, it's just about 5 acres.
And the fill on that property is why the initial proposal many years ago for townhomes never came to fruition. This was before I got on council, but the owner was looking for some consideration from the city to make up for the fact that they were going to have to sink a lot more money in for the pylons and everything. And at that time, the city wasn't willing to do it. So it's the same problem.
Mhm.
Jeremy, do you think that's enough direction for us to move forward with? Or is there anything else that we need more clarification on?
Can I be
Um,
recognized?
Sure.
Okay, so it might be a little biased. Obviously, I live on Manoa, the side that is up for discussion. As I've spoken to some of my neighbors over the last couple of months, I knew zoning was, a big topic. A lot of neighbors I've spoken with aren't comfortable with things changing. They want it residential. They want it to be homes. I'm not saying that's everybody. I know that's how I feel. That's how a few of my neighbors feel. So asking me about Manoa, I think Manoa should stay Manoa. That's just my honest opinion.
Hey, Aaron, how far, let me ask you something. How far does those yards in the back go back before it hits the end of your
It's-
yards?
My personal backyard heading towards Memphis, or which way?
North.
North. Well, for me, you know what? I'd be lying if I had a good guesstimate, but I know that right after my garage is the big field where they have a lot of the construction stuff going on by the bridge. So that's me. I'm very close. I'm one of the very first two houses towards Tiedemann. So that's my location. I just know that, I know that when you look at the big picture, it going, industrial type property, homes, field, Amazon's coming up back there. I understand the big picture, but the little picture is the picture that I personally live in. It's my home. This is my street. I have neighbors that have told me they've been here for 10, 15, 20 years. And to just say that, hey, we're going to change this street to mold it into what's next to it, I think that a lot of residents on my street wouldn't be too happy about that.
We certainly understand that. I would say that, it wasn't until recently that the property that was rezoned as the LI down by Tiedemann did the city start purchasing the properties. And what triggered that event was at some point, one of the houses was turned to a commercial use. So it couldn't be reverted back to a residential use after that. And they couldn't sell it after that. So the city was able to purchase the property for a fair market value. And then there was a domino after that. We never went out and sought. We weren't knocking on doors asking to buy property. These were deals that were coming to us or just made sense because they were so cheap. And I think that would be the same consideration for Manoa. It might not even happen in my lifetime to see that street turnover. It's more of a, what do we see long-term eventually happening in the city and what makes sense based upon what's surrounding it. So, I mean, Kathy could probably speak to this better than I, what year that was changed over in Tiedemann Road. I mean, those houses remained there for decades before you even saw the city move on any of that property.
Right. So it's been 30 years. And the city, I mean, as long as people are in those homes or whether they're buying or selling them, nothing can happen. So in other words, they're grandfathered in. So the city just can't come in and say, okay, you have like 5 years to leave. That basically they're grandfathered in. And as the mayor said, the city never even approached anybody about buying their property. Basically, it's been 30 years and it took that long for the city through kind of just circumstances to purchase a total of 3 of those properties. One was actually, I don't know if it was actually condemned, Mayor, but it was very dilapidated. The one on the end, and then like she mentioned, the other one, it had, the original owner had a mortgage business but had a young child, and the city had, because Tiedemann Road was widened, they lost like some frontage that would be like your tree lawn. So those sidewalks are right on, like very, very close to the road, and he had a young daughter. So he was the first property that turned, and basically it's like, nobody's going to buy my house, like a family's not going to move in here with young children because we're so close to a busy road. So, it was then purchased by somebody else who had a business. And like the mayor said, once you turn that one property, it can't go back to residential. But certainly I don't think the city would ever, try and like buy up all those houses on Manoa, and try and force people out. And it's been 30 years, literally. And I completely understand your situation. I do.
And that if we were to rezone our street and so forth, other than the city, could an outside company, like, just like a Target warehouse, could they propose purchasing properties? Like, how would that all work?
It would be up to the market. I mean, they could propose whatever they want to offer someone to buy a house, but you can say, no, I'm not selling it.
Okay, so obviously, but if, like, say the second half of the street wanted to sell, that they would have the right to do so.
I mean, just like you're selling your house to any other resident who wants to buy it for a homeowner use, anyone has a right to sell at any time. But I mean,
Yeah.
I think you're going to have a hard time. Right now you see Tiedemann Road, there's a few houses on there. There's nothing the city can do there. It's missing teeth at this point. And that's the same thing with Manoa. When there's just missing teeth, it's just empty lots. And there's no developer that's going to be able to do anything without all of the houses.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for answering my questions, guys.
Hey, Aaron, as our unofficial representative, I have a question for you. It's Sue. So one of the things when I first heard that proposal, I wondered how the residents felt about the development there. And if you feel that with the development that's going on around you, do you think it would be harder to sell your house in a single family? Because that was one of the things that I was thinking about, is that might actually give all the homeowners that are on that street more options when you decide to sell your house. Versus, especially with Amazon going in over on Memphis, that's a lot in your backyards now.
Absolutely.
But if it stays single family, then that kind of ties your hands too, that you're only going to be able to sell your house to someone who's willing to live on Manoa in that area too. So that was kind of what I was thinking, is that it would actually give you more freedom.
It would either be live, like if people really, really wanted to live on Manoa, or if someone wanted to come in and, mass like develop. I think, people ask me that know that I live on the street, my coworkers, so forth, because they know I drive by the Amazon every day. And they're like, what do I think of, seeing that, there? For me, I see jobs, but then it's like, whoa, that thing is getting monstrous. I mean, it is big. So I can see it from my backyard, literally. And as soon as you make that left onto Memphis, you're coming down Memphis from the, City Hall, you just see it. It's right there. To potential, like to sell like the house, if someone was wanting to sell, that might be a little difficult. Just especially like, again, commercial, industrial or whatever, Manoa, and then all of that. I'm guessing for a lot of people, that would be a turnoff.
I think, though, that's Sue's point, that if and when people wanted to sell, they would actually have another alternative versus trying to find someone who is who doesn't have a problem with all that right in their backyard.
I absolutely thank you for saying it like you just did. I absolutely now understand what Sue was saying, and I concur. I can understand and appreciate that, especially you were talking earlier, the big picture, and long term. Just for me, I'm just trying to I want to look ahead, but I also have to look at tomorrow. So that's just my 2 cents on the situation.
I would say beyond the marked areas, we have a lot of work to do on the maps. And I know Jeremy left this on me, a big map in my office to start circling. There's a lot of non-conforming uses or uses that are marked as something and they're not. You have by the park views, there's a property right there that's marked multifamily, which is not. Dan Enovich, if you all know where he lives off of Outlook, that's marked like that, but including his house. So there are areas that the administration, and I would recommend you as council kind of dive in and question some of these parcels, because it's been difficult for Liz to convert this map that was a little colored in with hands to the computer and to what they're actually being used now. I mean, you can kind of see if you go down Rodone, the orange, we know there's single family houses there right past Memphis Villas. So I can circle that right now, but we know our community better than she does and Jeremy does. So just certain areas where, we need to make sure that we're clearing it up. And Sue pointed out at the last meeting, we have the terraces, the apartment buildings off of Bidoff, that's all zone single family. Do we recognize what it is? And it's an apartment building, so clean that up. So there's definitely a lot of work with this map that we still have to do.
And we'll continue to update that changes map so we can track that as we go for the public and all of you. Because I think it's very important. Obviously, this needs to be a very transparent process, and it's going to go to the voters. Any changes to the map to anything but single family needs to be approved by the voters, as you all know. So we need to make sure that there is support for these changes. We don't want a change to the map to bring down the whole process. So that's all just something that we need to consider as we go along and make sure that we're tracking that and kind of making sure that everyone's aware of what we're doing and on the same page. And I'm happy to email around like a big, nice, full-size copy of this draft map. If you guys want to print it out or just have it large on your screen to kind of zoom in. If you want to just let Jeremy know if you want that, we can send that around to all of you.
I would like that. And Jeremy, is it possible for you to also print one out, like maybe either on ledger paper or legal size paper as well?
Yeah, we can print out a small version, and then we have also a plot size, board size one here as well. So yeah, I can have that for you at the next council meeting.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that wraps up our map discussion. If there's anything else that pops up that you want to talk about with the map, we can, but I'd like to move on to kind of our proposed use changes and this discussion, and then we can wrap this up soon. So this is kind of a summary of what we talked about with the advisory committee, and that was in my presentation. From a use standpoint, we're not really proposing any significant changes to the residential zoning districts, your single family districts, your 2-family districts, your apartment districts. Those are going to essentially stay very similar to what they are. We are looking to update some of the terms and adding in some uses that the code doesn't address, like townhomes. Attached single family is the kind of the technical term. That's, that term, that use is not included in your code. So if we can call it out, and then we can, say what zones that's going to be approved in and in what conditions, if any, would be applied to those uses. Other examples are like a live work unit. That could be a use that would be applied to some of the retail districts, like maybe along Ridge or Memphis. That could be a good transition use for those single family houses that front a commercial thoroughfare. If you allowed a little bit more flexibility in those areas for somebody to convert a house into an office on the first floor and kind of a living apartment on the second floor, that might be a good compromise, kind of in the meantime, as some of these houses may transition over time. But that's pretty much essentially the updates from a use standpoint for the residential districts. For the commercial districts, primarily adding in uses that the code currently doesn't address. We are proposing to add in multifamily as a potential in a very limited basis in very specific locations as identified in the master plan. So the master plan has a couple of mixed use areas identified in the major shopping centers like the Biddle Plaza, as the possibility of maybe having some retrofitting in some townhomes or things like that. So we're going to refer very directly back to the master plan recommendations and make sure that doesn't get kind of overblown or interpreted in ways that you all don't want it to. We want to make sure that it's very in line with the master plan recommendations. Other examples are uses like animal trading and boarding. Your code didn't address those. Breweries, distilleries, those uses, they're popping up everywhere. And then mixed uses, combining different uses within the same building or creating a development or a project that has multiple uses in the same site, but that may be in different buildings. So that's the main updates to the commercial districts. And then with the industrial districts, there's those districts have the most kind of limited amount of changes. The main thing that we did was update some uses and terms, especially to address distribution and fulfillment, to address like the Amazon place, and then the kind of category of new uses that are coming onto the scene for grocery stores, where they're going to have kind of like refrigerated warehouses for grocery orders at home or fulfillment at stores. We want to make sure that we have kind of clear uses that define what those are, where they can go, because they're coming.
Can I ask one quick question? I know I didn't hear the whole explanation in the beginning of the meeting. So the car wash right now is under retail business as permitted. You said that's going to go back to conditional?
Yes. Yeah, that was an oversight by us. We know that you currently have them conditional in that zone, and the intention is to keep them that way. So we've already made that change moving forward. And so that, again, was just oversight by us.
Okay. And is it only going to be in retail business, or is it also going to be in general business, or just the one category?
I don't have that in front of me. Jeremy, do you have the proposed use table?
I don't see it in general business. There were, other automotive things in there. That's why I brought it up. I'm not saying it should or shouldn't. It was just a question.
Yeah, I think we were proposing, and Liz, I think it's on your next slide. But I think we were proposing the auto washing facilities being conditional.
Conditional in both.
Conditional in both. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Sure. Yeah, there was just a couple things that we were oversights in that, or that we got some feedback on, that we're proposing to change, that are on the slide here.
And what about I don't know if this is too early to bring this up, but the check cashing, payday lending facilities and everything?
Yeah, so we don't have those specifically called out on this slide or the next slide, but we made them a separate use so they can be distinguished from financial institutions. And I believe that we have them as conditional in just
general. Yeah, just general business conditional, correct.
So you could have straight banks and credit unions and those like things in both RB and GB, but then just the check cashing would be conditional.
And are we going to be able to continue to have our limitation on those? Like, I think based on our population, we're not supposed to have more than one. And I know at least one, if not two, have closed.
For the check cashing?
Mhm. And
Yeah,
paper
we'll double
lending.
check all that with Kevin and the law
Okay.
department to make sure that we're not doing anything that we can't do, and we'll blow back on you all. That's a conversation we need to have about that and the discount stores and the small self-storage, these controversial uses that we want to limit and kind of as much as we can and in the right way, but in a way that you're not going to get sued at the second this code gets adopted. So it's a fine line that we're trying to kind of weave and figure out the best way. But the intention right now is to have the check cashing as conditional only in the general business. And then also for the, this will be the next slide. We can come back to this one, that the self-storage to be conditional in just the general industrial district, and the small format discount stores, the dollar stores, to be conditional in the GB district. So that's our current plan. And then we can also, create standards for how far apart they can be, what they have to look like, more of those kind of development standards as we go forward too. But again, like I said, we need to make sure that everything that we're doing, the law department is comfortable with.
Yeah, we wanted to get on the moratorium uses, just a little bit of feedback on, do we want to go the route that Cleveland just went with the small format discount stores, where they limited them one every 2 miles, and then they put pretty stringent development standards for design and things like that. And some communities do the same thing with self-storage. So we haven't put that geographic restriction on there, but it's something that we could as a way to limit a concentration of them in one part of the city, which is really the reason why, in reading why Cleveland, among other reasons, but one of the reasons why they decided to put the restrictions on that type of use that they did. And other communities are looking at self-storage the same way. So we jumped ahead. Sorry, Liz.
That's okay. Just to cover this before to get in that whole discussion, this is just a summary of some of the updates we've made or are proposing to make from that feedback to make adult uses conditional in the zones, to change the automotive fueling, repair, and washing to conditional in both the commercial zones. Same thing with convenience stores, make those conditional in both commercial zones. To add office as a permitted use in the industrial zone, that was an oversight. To change theater to conditional in the commercial zones, and then to change construction equipment storage yard to conditional in the industrial zone. So those are basically anything. Those are what we are proposing to change from the materials that was presented a couple weeks ago. So anything on that before we get into these moratorium uses? Okay. So like Jeremy said, these are kind of our 3 hot button topics that, you all have called out in your moratorium, and we just kind of wanted to check in with you all to make sure that we're addressing these uses in the way that is the most appropriate moving forward, since we have this opportunity to kind of get this right and address these. I'll just open it up.
Yeah, and I think in this discussion, we're looking at more of the use standards. So do we want to impose geographic restrictions on how close something can go? Do we want to define, for self-storage, do you have to have a certain amount of acreage? Dealing with where something sits geographically. There'll be another opportunity to get into what it looks like, from an aesthetic perspective. So, we have the ability to make them look, as nice as the community would want to see. But this is really thinking, where are they most appropriate, and at what concentration are they most appropriate where they are within the zoning of the city.
Personally, I think we want to limit them, and I think another one should go on there are the check cashing, payday lending places. I know for a while they were all, I don't know if they're still out there, but they had like auto title lending. I think that belongs on here too, because we already have legislation that limits it. I mean, they don't really bring much to our community, and in some cases harm it. So I would say whatever we can do to limit them, whether you do that like so many within a, so many square miles and do it geographically. For self-storage, can you limit it only to facilities who don't have like, when I say outdoors, it's like they have those outdoor garages that you pull up versus the ones where you actually walk into a facility?
So yeah, we included a slide with, kind of a variety of your self-storage uses, because they are such a popular use right now, and they are coming in a variety of shapes and styles. So I think, you mean this kind of very typical, when people think of self-storage, they think of these, the rows of garage doors, it's single story, it probably has some crappy looking fence around it. It's not obviously an attractive use by any standpoint. But now you have storage going into shopping centers. This is really close to my house down here in Loveland, Ohio. It was like an Office Depot or office supply store that went out of business and now is a self-storage. But it's not unattractive. Like, they went into a brick building and they're filling a unit, but it's also not a great use of the space too. And then these top two are kind of your more extreme, but I know U-Haul especially is developing these kind of multi-story interior storage facilities everywhere. A community we work with down here right now they're proposing one, and it's 50 stories tall, and it has like fake garage doors on the bottom, like decals of these garage doors on the bottom. It's a ridiculous thing. But this is where the market is going, and where self-storage is going, is these multi-story interior situations. A lot of times they're climate controlled, they can have heating and, cooled ones if you need a air conditioned unit. But then also, like the U-Haul places, they may have a bunch of trucks outside too to rent their U-Haul trucks. And they're also getting into the pod business where, they have those little temporary pods. So these uses tend to snowball too and kind of build on each other. But I agree that you kind of need to think from a self-storage standpoint of which of these options are you okay with, if any, or which ones would you not want to see, so that we can kind of develop those standards that would be put in the code to kind of, figure out which of these ones that you would, if any came, what are the ones you would like to come, and which ones would you not want to come?
When you're talking about trucks and commercial vehicles, and to me, these units and all should be taken up on Clinton Road, and they should go in some of those dead buildings and fix them up and put it up there away from residential areas. I don't agree with any of this, especially your bottom left. Your bottom left with those green doors, that is, I'm going to tell you something, that's acreage. And I've seen them built. And you're talking a ton of acreage. They need to take that up on Clinton Road. They can build out all those old raggedy buildings that are on Clinton Road and put that in there. This way, if they have trucks, that's where they need to take it. I don't believe any of this stuff should go in residential areas. I really don't.
Proposing any of this to go in residential areas.
No, I think it is proposed by for general industrial, correct?
Correct.
Yes, I believe that the current thought is conditional in general industrial.
The
I think
thought,
that's it.
Yeah, the thought, it would only go in general industrial, and the thought was that it was most appropriate on Clinton. And it could be a potential reuse or infill of some of that property up there. But
I guess
yeah,
what I'm saying, residential, old shopping centers we got is close enough to residential for me. Ridge Park Square is right across the street. They ain't far from residential. It's surrounded by residential. So's Bit Off Shopping Center, surrounded by residential. This should be taken up on Clinton Road. That's where this should be put.
that's the only place we're proposing it, is that general industrial, not in any general business or retail business. So it wouldn't be in those areas at all. It's not
Okay.
permitted. It would only be conditionally in the general industrial. So it would still have to meet certain standards above and beyond what's in the general industrial district, only in that geographic area. So it would be Clinton and that northern part of the city.
Yeah, I would say if you're, you limit the area, you limit the density based upon mileage, if Kevin allows that. I know he's very iffy about that. And then have the standards, so the height is not as big as the one you were talking about. I don't know if that would even happen, but limit the height. But I would prefer, if you're gonna have it, like, allow for a little bit of density too, because then they'll squeeze into a smaller space because it's not really producing tax dollars at all either.
Yeah,
And
you
then
could
is-
like a minimum of 2 stories, but no more than 3 stories or something like that.
Yeah.
You can develop standards that kind of put them in a hole where, maybe you have something like this, but you don't have this, or this,
Yeah.
like that kind of thing. That's all open and available to you.
Well, and I think the way it's drafted now, it limits it to internally accessed door units. So you wouldn't have the bottom left with the green doors. You'd have more of an internal building. There's some restrictions if it were to be by residential, but where it's proposed, I don't know that there would be that conflict. And I think when we get into the design standards, we'll certainly add to that to make it look better. And I think we'll put in there some kind of geographic restriction that would limit the density of that type of use in that district.
Liz, I like what you said a lot about a minimum of 2 stories, maximum of 3. I think that is a great way to go. One of my concerns, which is also a concern on other things, is when you look at the bottom left-hand one, that's all that land could ever be unless they were torn down. The other 3 could conceivably have other uses at another time, but that bottom left one is storage or take it down and start from scratch again. And I hate to see buildings that only have a single life like that when we're not sure how long that life would extend. And I'm not sure that the boom in storage space will continue like they are. I mean, it's bizarre. People need to purge.
It's true. We see, such a boom in uses like senior living, but when the baby boomers are no longer around and we have this break between the millennials and the baby boomers, well, we need the concentration of those uses. We don't know, like there's so much with planning that evolves and is cyclical. And so it is good to think about this stuff. And I don't know exactly how the internal circulations of these things work and how easy it is to convert them to other things, but it has to be easier in my mind to convert a building than it is, obviously these are just warehouse metal blocks. So just things to consider. And
That's a really good point, Sue, that you made about that. And also, I kind of agree that you don't know how long they're going to have such demand for it, because the younger generation is more into spending their money on experiences versus things.
Hey, Liz,
Mhm.
you mentioned the nursing homes or the, assisted living homes and all this and that. The way it is now, that's the only use they can have, right? Correct?
It like at a specific location or the zoning?
Right, because let's say like, we're all kind of like doing this hypothetical, like 10, 20, 30 years from now. What if they get converted to, apartments?
So whatever use of, so you can't require that a senior living facility stay a senior living facility forever. But if
Right.
it was to transition to another use, it would have to be a permitted use in that zoning district.
Okay,
So if they're located in an area where multifamily is not permitted, then they could not transition to multifamily. They could maybe transition to medical office or a rehabilitation facility or physical therapy or, something like that. So I think anytime a use could transitions to a new use, it still has to remain a permitted use in that district and meet any standards that would apply to it. So I think, that's something that you need to consider of where you allow senior living versus where you allow these other uses.
okay.
So anything else on storage? I feel like I have good direction from you all on this, or any of these other moratorium uses that we need to discuss tonight.
I would say we didn't talk about billboards, and my personal opinion is that billboards should not be allowed in our community unless on the highway. And then even, I know ODOT has the rules, and I think it's 1,000 feet for every electronic sign, but I don't know for general signs what that is. But even to limit it on the highway use would be helpful. I think seeing billboards, and I know this came up because the moratorium exists because we were stuck. I don't want to see billboards within our residential area, within our other retail, commercial area. I understand why people want big signs off the highway, but that's about it.
I agree. I'd be okay with not seeing any more billboards going up if possible.
I agree as well.
Ditto, no more.
Me too.
I even think 480's gotten pretty saturated, but I mean, I know that's not all of our say, but if I had to say, so if anybody was asking me about that, there's enough on 480 now too.
Yep.
I take it you guys don't like the ones on 480 by Best Buy. The exploiting ones is what they call those.
So there's only
We
so
can only
much-
control what happens in Brooklyn. That's Cleveland.
Exactly.
But even then, we can't control with First Amendment rights.
It's going to be a fun discussion when we get to signs. Can't say I'm really looking forward to it, but we'll get through it.
I would say for discount stores, I would say the same thing, limit it by area. I think that, we're saturated in particular areas, and if Kevin Butler allows us to do, restrict by the mileage, how many per mile, that I think it would help. And then I would say one more that has come up in the building department over and over is vape stores. So if that could be restricted by how many per mile, I think that would be helpful because we're getting more and more of those calls.
Yes, we do have those called out as a separate use. I think that we have the category as like vape stores, CBD stores, and tobacco to kind of cover that whole category. But I'm not sure we have a distance requirement. I think we just made them conditional. So we can look into a distance requirement as well.
Yeah, we have vape, tobacco, liquor sale as conditional in general business. So we'd have to add the geographic restriction.
But my guess is, and again, we're gonna have to talk to Kevin about this, but if we developed a similar distance requirement between the vape stores and the discount stores and, all of these uses that we're talking about, if we kind of had a consistent distance, whether that's 500 feet or 2,000 feet, or I don't know where that's going to land, that may be easier to enforce than if, vape stores were at 500 feet and self-storage was at 300 feet, if we had different requirements. So that's something we'll need to discuss with Kevin, of kind of the rules and how those get applied. But we'll figure that out. All right, well, we talked about that. So to wrap up, we are finishing up the use standard. So we have, the uses where they're permitted, and then kind of the standards that apply to both conditional uses. And then we're going to have additional standards that apply to some permitted uses, whether those be additional setback requirements or additional design requirements. So those we are finalizing with staff and kind of refining those. Once those, once us and staff are kind of comfortable with those, we will, have you all review them and have them available to the public for review. And then we are starting to draft the dimensional and design standards. So we're going to be working through those sections. That's going to be the next chunk you'll see. And then we'll keep moving down the list, and pretty much every about 2 months, we should have a kind of next section to review with all of you. That's our plan. So our next advisory committee meeting is anticipated to be in April. And then based on this kind of new format that we're doing, we are proposing to have our next public open house in June. So our thought at the moment is to kind of meet with the advisory committee on a more regular basis, pretty much about every other month, and then wait until we have kind of a bigger amount of code to then a review with the public, since we're not getting the amount of participation that we would like to see at those meetings. We're trying to kind of come up with a different scenario to best use our resources and engage the public.
Yeah, the idea being having more frequent meetings with the advisory committee and council, and then posting to the website and making that available and promoting people to take a look at it, and then following up with the open house, where we'll have the boards and have an opportunity to dialogue. So people will be able to see it as it's being done, and then have an opportunity to come in and talk about it in person.
So that's all we have for you tonight. But again, if there's any other questions, I'm happy to discuss them.
I'm good. It was very informational. Even being on the advisory committee, the changes were good to hear, and I thought it was good. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for your time.
We'll see you all soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Yep.